We are going live, ladies and gentlemen. We'll just banter for a little bit, and then I'll do an official start.
Of course.
Let me just make sure that this thing comes in and is muted. There we go. All right, looks like we're live, everybody. Hi, everybody. Let me jump over here. That way everybody's at least on camera talking. Excuse me. Who do we got so far? Oh, Andre's here. Awesome, from Canada. Tim, hi. Terry Wagner. Sante Food and Beverage, you know who that is. Freddie Clark. Do you know Freddie, Deborah?
I don't think so.
And then Terry and Michael. Mike is here. Mike works for Casio, audio guy, audio genius guy. Yeah, nice. Looks like we're going to have some fun today. Malcolm is here too. Cool.
And then all the silent people that will only chime in when there's something witty to say.
Which is exactly what's going to happen. So to everybody, hi. We're gonna start quote unquote officially here in just a second. We've got 9 images. If they go really quick, I've got a spare one just in case. Gary's here too. Gary's always here. Mac Attack is here. Hi. So we're gonna first of all, I should check before we do this quote unquote official, because all of this I trim off later. Everybody got good audio? Everybody sound okay to everybody?
I sound fine, I guess.
You sound like you. Deborah, talk to everybody here.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, Melody's here.
To be here.
Melody is a fantastic photographer, does a lot of bird photography that's amazing. Andre is a landscape photographer like yourself. Mike said that everything sounds good. Toronto Boris is here. Nice. Yeah, we're going to have some fun today. We've got 9 images, and then in case they go quick, because some of them might, I've got a 10th one as a backup. But with Andy last time, we went really, really long and loved it. So I'm kind of hoping that we have some good, deep conversation again today. Malcolm Ritter says, let me pull this up here really quick. Malcolm says, Deborah has a lot of reverb in her audio. That's her room. She's in a room with wooden floors, and it's not a super close mic. So yeah, but you're hearing her okay, right? That's the main thing. Gary said, go long again, please. Which, yes, that would be great. I would love to go long again. I got to remember I've got 2 computers here. I was going to set up my phone so everybody could see, but it's not working right. And then, Steve Cohen is here. I think I might have a shot from Steve. Steve had a couple of shots in the Flickr group that were fantastic. I got to say, Don, I don't know if you looked at the Flickr group this time, or Deborah, I don't know if you went and looked. It was a hard choice. I don't
know how you make these picks, Steve.
Dude, I had like 50 tabs open in Safari going, well, I want to do that one because there's a lot that we could critique on it to help people. But at the same time, I just had that photographer on last week or something like that. It was actually pretty tough. So let's do this. Any questions from anybody before we do quote unquote the official start?
I think we're good to go.
Good to go.
And the audience, of course, will chime in with questions or commentary as they usually do.
Oh, yeah. The comments get fun. Sometimes a little bizarre, which is great. And Deborah, so that you know, if there's anything that you want, I should tell you, if there's anything that you want, marked to show people when you're talking about an image, I actually can't do it here. Let me just show the first image. I can draw.
Oh, very good.
Images. Just so that you know. I mean, I'm not super accurate at my aim because I don't see the picture where I'm drawing, but I can do it if need be. Okay, I think we're good, folks. Let's do a quote unquote official start. Terry said bizarre. We got 23 so far, which I like. I'll tell you in a minute. Okay. Blah 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 blah. What is this? Number 21, Don? I think it's number 21.
Sure, why not?
And when we get to the point of telling people how to get involved in this, I'll have you do it this time, if that's all right with you.
All righty.
I think we're good. Thank you, Gary. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Behind the Shot image. Blah, 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 blah. It's been a really long day here in Southern California. No, I can't stop laughing.
Says the radio host that does this professionally as well.
I know. Hi, everybody. Welcome once again to a Behind the Shot image critique show. Hi, welcome to Behind the Shot. I'm Steve Brazill, and this is Image Critique Show number 21. A couple of things to let you know about before we dive too deep into the critiques and I bring on my co-host and our guest for this time around. If you've never seen Behind the Shot before as a podcast, the normal podcast app or podcast shows are different than this image critique show. They're available wherever you get your podcasts in either an audio only or a video format, assuming that the podcast app or service that you're using to get your podcast supports video. If you want all the different ways that you can subscribe, or if you want information on the show or details on a specific show, as always, go to the website. It is behindtheshot.tv. On social media, the best places are either Instagram or Twitter, and it's at Behind the Shot TV. For me, it's just at Steve Brazill or stevebrazill.com. Also, these image critique shows, they only show up on YouTube. If you are watching on YouTube and looking right now, it looks like a number of people have already liked this video. I can't say thank you enough for that, but according to the statistics that I see, only about 30% are actually subscribed to the channel. So if you would do me a favor, head on down, click the subscribe button, click the bell, choose all so that you're aware every time Don and I go live with one of these image critique shows, or every time I post a regular episode. And while you're there, if you would click the thumbs up button, that actually helps a lot with discoverability. So I would appreciate that too. One last thing I want to let you know about is the workshop I'm doing with Freddie Clark, who's in the chat here. It's the Wanderer's Photo Workshop. It's in New Orleans. It's 4 instructors over 5 days, a multi-genre workshop. It's too much to go into here, so I'm just going to tell you, go to the website for the workshop, which is wanderersphoto.com. It's an all-inclusive workshop, a few exceptions. Details are on the site, but it's going to be a lot of fun. Number of days, me and Freddie and Ant Pruitt and Andrew Scrivani in New Orleans with you for a fun multi-genre workshop. And I think that brings us up to it. So let's jump into my co-host for these shows, Mr. Don Komarechka. Don, how are you?
I am very well, Steve. Just still doing a marathon of shipping out my book to everybody that has pre-ordered them. All the Kickstarter books are out. Going through website pre-orders as a marathon. But I did have a brief reprieve from that, doing 6 weeks of nonstop signing and packaging and shipping out books to do a photo, presentation on crystal photography using cross-polarized crystals for Venus optics and their Lioa lenses, which we just did yesterday. And I guess I can maybe give you a link to that if anybody wants to watch that particular presentation, which is free online. It was a lot of fun, a great distraction from the work that I'm now back to of
Packing
getting
boxes
books out the door. Exactly.
Yeah,
and so you're also distracting me from that exact process right now, but I welcome the distraction. I love this. It's one of my favorite hours of the month.
Yeah, it's the same with me. I look forward to this every time, and partially because of the guest that we have on. So I'd like to welcome Nikon Ambassador Deborah Sandidge to the show. Deborah, how are you?
I am fine, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm super excited to meet Don also. I've heard so much about his work and I've seen so many pictures, so I feel very honored.
Yeah,
and
Don,
thanks. I look forward to seeing everybody's photos. So
we've got a lot of photos lined up today, but I do want to just say, for those that don't know Deborah's work, Nikon Ambassador, you can follow her on Flickr, by the way. It's Deb Sandidge on Flickr. But she was on a past episode. And if you go look at the show notes for behindtheshot.tv for this critique show number 21, there are links to the show she was on, which was called Better Travel Photography. It was a landscape, long exposure landscape from a beautiful French countryside. Absolutely awesome. But we'll talk about Deborah more at the break. About halfway through, we'll take a break. Deborah can tell you all the stuff that she's up to so that you can follow her. And Dawn, if people want to get involved with getting their images into the critique shows, what do they need to do?
Well, we have a Flickr group, the Behind the Shot Flickr group, which you could find the links probably in the description for this video or on behindtheshot.tv. And go there, join the group, post your images, have fun, comment on images, and just be a part of that community. That's great. If you want an image to be considered for the critique show, You just have to add a tag in there, one of the Flickr tags, not a hashtag. The Flickr has their tagging system of btscritique, and that just gives us the permission to possibly, it's not a guarantee. There's always so many great submissions, and we have to only choose about 9 of them every week to bring forward into the critique show. So join the Flickr group Behind the Shot, submit an image, and add a tag btscritique, and you are in the running to be on the show.
And really, the tag is kind of your permission saying, I'm willing for you guys to use this one in the show. You know, you got to put it in there. It makes it easier. Deborah, really quick before we do move on, if people want to find you, social media, website, where is all of that stuff?
debsandidge.com. I'm also Deborah Sandidge, but Twitter, Instagram is Deb Sandidge. That's an easy way to find me. Thanks.
Okay, sounds good. So everybody go look her up. And actually, who was it? Terry just said, you must check out her website. Totally agree.
Oh,
and then Mike Martin said, watch the Behind the Shot episode with Deborah, because really, honestly, it is a beautiful, beautiful photo. Her work will make you wish that you were on vacation is the best way to work. So with that in mind, and Deborah, I should have warned you ahead of time, but when we do this, the first image that we pull up, I always have our guest go first. So for image number 1, this is called Homesteader Home. What do you got?
Yes. Oh, this is a beautiful shot. I looked at this, and this is the type of shot that I would love to take. Just because you have the element of the dramatic clouds, which are absolutely gorgeous. And you know, shooting a landscape photo, you always hope they have glorious clouds because it's going to make the shot. I love the old, the aging barn. It tells such a story. So I really like that. One of the first things I think about when I saw this shot is that, oh my God, I'd love to shoot this in infrared. You know, that's like a step over what you're doing to work a little bit with infrared, because then it's going to change the dynamics of that shot. You know, the grass that you see in the foreground will be a little bit lighter. Things are reflected and absorbed differently to different surfaces. So yeah, I think the photographer did a great job. It was just that moment of really expressive and dramatic clouds.
Okay, Don, what do you got?
Infrared is actually a great option for an image like this. As Deborah said, the grass would be brighter, and possibly the trees in the background would be brighter than the sky behind them as well, as anything that produces photosynthesis will reflect a lot of infrared light and gets quite bright. You know, I'm a bit distracted by the brightness of the roof. I don't know exactly what might tone that down. Possibly a circular polarizer on the camera, just to bring the brightness of that down, so that it's not directly competing with the brightness of the clouds right above it, so that there's a bit more separation. You know, I mean, ideally in the current brightness, you'd have the little patch in the opening of the clouds. It's above the sort of really falling apart shed, right behind the main farmstead, just to create the separation of subject within those things. But this could be a good image, and this would be something that I would experiment with. I mean, I would take this shot, and then I'd throw on a heavy neutral density filter and just see what would happen as those clouds might blur over a longer exposure. I do like their crispness and their sharpness, but I do feel like some of the edges of the clouds, right middle frame, might be a bit too sharp. Maybe it's over sharpening. Maybe it's just that I want the attention to be more on the textures in the barn itself. And that transition can happen if you deliberately start to blur those with motion blur. And that could also kind of give a show of time. You know, this is old, and the passing of time with the blurring of the clouds might indicate a narrative as such.
So I agree with everything both of you just said. First of all, part of the reason I picked this was because it had impact. As I was going through the Flickr group, instantly, it was, wow, right? It's one of those types of shots. Then I started looking closer. So first of all, the things I like. Very clean, very tasteful, very subtle black and white conversion. You got the right amount of contrast, not too much contrast. So I love what you did with the black and white mostly, which I'll get into in a minute. It's not the this is the Palouse area, according to the comments. And when I picture Palouse, I always picture the workshop photos. Way up on the hill, shooting down at the rolling hills with a grain house in the distance. This is completely different from what I'm used to seeing in shots from Palouse. I love that, right? Your composition, your placement of the horizon horizontally, just below, like around the bottom third, I absolutely love. Here's where I kind of started thinking a little bit differently. First of all, the houses and the dilapidated barn area are too center for me. That whole section on the left, I don't really need. I'd rather you had about the same amount of space on the left as you do to the right of the trees. So that would balance that tree line with the house and the barn on kind of thirds and just kind of give me some balance in the shot. Also, I don't think you need that much clouds. Right dead center, or to the right of center, there's a little wafting cloud. I'm going to see if I can hit it, but I'll miss it probably. But right about there, I missed it. I'm to the right. But you see what I mean, like right here. I don't need that. I would actually, if I were you, I would crop just below that, which would give me a more panoramic feel to it. And last but not least is over by the trees and the horizon line to the right of that. It looks as though maybe you had some chromatic aberration that during your black and white conversion gave a white line. It's not a traditional halo, but if you look close at those trees, it's white behind them. And personally, I'd like to see that cleaned up a little bit. I do have a question though, because I don't do a lot of landscape long exposure. And Deborah does. Deborah, if you were to shoot a scene like this long exposure, do you know how long you would go?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. First of all, that would be I would do two things. Shoot it in infrared, and then you could tell another story by shooting it as a long exposure. So you have so many options, as Don said, when you have these great clouds. So I would approach it that way. I'd use a 15-stop neutral density filter in probably about 4 to 5 minutes, depending on how fast those clouds are moving.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, if you get it just depends on how fast they're moving, but I generally start at the 15 stop range and the 4 to 5 minute range, and it really smooths out those clouds and allows the subject to pop out. So that's another option for the photographer here.
Interesting. There's a couple of comments I want to point out.
Sure.
Tim Davis said 2-to-1 aspect ratio, lose some of the foreground. To me, it's the clouds I would lose. But then Matthew actually said, why black and white? And I have a question for both of you. Would you do this in color, or to you, is this a black and white shot?
That's a tough one. Again, tells a different story, but I would be inclined to work with the black and white aspect because it's so timeless, it's so traditional, and it's just absolutely beautiful. It allows the shapes, the patterns to really show in this photograph. So I think it's a perfect candidate for black and white.
What about you,
I might
Don?
play with color, but in infrared as false color. I think that would be just a subtle bit of possible blue coming in through the sky, and whatever you can bring up as like a possible dull pink. And I just mean just above zero saturation in the foreground, just to give it something aside from monochrome. And that can be done, by the way, especially if you're playing with long exposures. That's the native position for an unmodified camera with an infrared filter on it. You're going to have to play with long exposures. And I've done them as long as 16 minutes in bright sunlight with an unmodified camera and a Hoya R72 filter on the camera at a lower ISO setting. Now, adjust your aperture and your ISO to get yourself into the 4 to 5 minute range, but that's what you might expect to get in infrared if you only have the one camera with you right now in order to start experimenting with that. You've got that extra filter in your bag, so keep that handy.
I will add one thing that I meant to say, and that is I agree with Don. I wish that the clouds were a tad softer, not a ton even, but a tad, so that the texture in the dilapidated house and barn came out. I would burn the roof down because I do think it's too bright, but that's part of the reason I think a long exposure would work. And by the way, the torn up buildings is part of the reason that, to me at least, this is definitely a black and white shot to me because of that weathered building look. Let's jump to shot number 2. This one is called Roll 'em Up. Don?
I love the reflection in the water. I don't know why my eyes went there, like the surfboard in the water. I just think that that's really cool, almost like emblazoning a sunset. And then my eyes kind of connect back and forth across there, and then I see the rest of the scene. And so you've got the surfer, the two surfers in the background, and the photographer that is attempting to photograph on a monopod, which is a great idea when you're photographing surfers, by the way. and trying to get them to, I don't know if there's any panning motion that photographer is trying to do, or just capturing the fury of the water splashing about. And I look at this image and I see that story being told, and I want to see the photo that photographer is taking possibly more than this photo itself. This one is a great behind the scenes image that illustrates exactly this atmosphere in this scene, but I'm not sure it's the photograph in this scene that I would actually want to be seeing, knowing that somebody is photographing a more pristine view of some specific action within the shot. This does kind of have a different story to it, and there's merit to that, obviously. But I would be a little bit more front and center. And but it's funny, as a photographer looking at this, I'm learning things. Okay, roll up your pants, wear Crocs, use a monopod. There's photo lessons in this photograph in order to how to photograph surfers. I'm nowhere near a coastline here myself, so it's not something that I would normally do. And so I'm picking up all of these little bits and pieces. As an image itself, I'd almost want there to be either a greater depth of field so that I could see the faces out of focus in the background, or less depth of field so it's completely obscured and I'm not kind of worried about trying to refocus my eyes on those people and having a hard time because obviously they're out of focus.
Okay, so I'll go second on this one, and I was gonna say this, and my buddy Ant Pruitt of Hands-On Photography podcast, he's been on Don's show. He does a lot of stuff with Leo Laporte's Twit network, and Ant made the comment, I love this story. It's a different perspective. And that's where I'm going to take this. So for me, it's interesting to hear what Don said, because have you ever had those moments where you don't necessarily disagree, and yet at the same time, your mind is telling you that you do? This to me is the correct subject here. And I'll tell you why. The surf is small. There's not going to be any crazy waves here based on the size of the surf that's in this shot, at least. I mean, there could be something I'm not seeing, but for this particular shot, there's not. You've got the photographer, pants rolled up, walking with his shoes out in the water. I do think that in many ways, this is the shot. It's a nice balance of exposure and light and the reflection, like Don said, of that yellow board in the water, in the foreground tide pools that are there. I love how much of that foreground water you've got in there. Here's where I agree with Don and why I'm kind of torn between these two. While I do like the fact that, look, the young lady on the right on the surfboard looks like she's just learning to surf. I don't know about the guy on the left, he's on his belly. To me, the photographer and the guy with the board is kind of the story. I wish I could see the camera. So I can see the monopod. But if I wasn't a photographer, it's entirely possible that I would look at this and not know that was a monopod and not know what he was doing. I wish that you would, and I don't know that you could have. For all I know, there's a cliff there. But I wish that you could have moved a little bit to the right so that I could see the side of the camera, see the monopod, maybe get a little more distance down the wave to get some, foreground, midground, background. Maybe there's surfers way in the distance down the way that would be absolutely nice. As far as the processing, I think it's oversaturated. I think the blues especially are a little too strong in this, and I'd like to see some more room on both sides. I think it's a little tight. Last but not least, the horizon line is not technically straight and it's dead center. So I'd try and fudge this a little bit to get it off center and make sure that it's straight. Deborah, what do you got?
Well, that's an interesting collection of thoughts. There's so many things that cross my mind. First of all, it's just the idea of this, it's showing the chaos of surfing and photographers and so much action in one small frame, which is really pretty interesting. It almost feels like this is a part of a section of stories. In other words, there's like 2 or 3 other pictures that go with this to make it a collection. To stand on its own, I would love the idea of having a little bit more real estate on both sides. But it's an interesting story. I think the surfer with the yellow surfboard with that reflection, that to me is a beautiful story. That would be, if you isolate that subject. But I don't think that's what this is about. I don't think that's what the photographer had in mind. I think he wanted to show sort of all the action and all the things that were happening. Rocky beaches, near and dear to my heart. That's what I do. I have my shooting shooting at rocky beaches. So to me, there's such interesting texture, and there's so many interesting layers: the rocks, the waves, the bigger waves in the background, and the horizon in the background. But yeah, I like the action. I think there's potentially a lot going on in the shot, so that's what kind of drew me to it.
I would edit two things out of this image. One of them, the surfer in the foreground, has a drop of water on his left hand. And my eyes keep going to that because it devalues the entire silhouette. There's that one bright spot there, and it's tiny, but it grabs your attention. And so too is like the don't photograph somebody in front of a telephone pole type of idea. The surfer on his belly has some sort of weird vertical cloud structure right above his head. I'd clone that out as well, because there is a lot of chaos in the image, and you can try to minimize the things that aren't needed. Oh, Steve, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
There you go.
Toronto Boris said, I love the subject, but I feel the aspect ratio makes it feel cramped. And that really, I think if you opened this up, a lot of the other issues would go away. It would just have a more open feel to it. Let's jump to number 3, and I will go first on this one. This one is called Feeling Okay. And this particular shot is, according to the description on Flickr, this is a self-portrait. And there's a number of things I love about this as a self-portrait. First of all, the way that you are experimenting here creatively, the tight crop, the low ceiling on the photo, the look on your face. There's a lot that I like with the way you're experimenting with doing a self-portrait. That said, there are a number of things here that I think can really be improved upon. One, it is too tight. While I like the concept, the fact that you're touching his hat brim on frame left, camera left, I would like to see that hat brim be free. Raise that a little bit. Also, it's too tight on his cheek on frame right, camera right. I'd open that up a little bit. I don't mind you touching his bicep like that, but the other side and the top, I think, need to be opened up a little bit. Let me see the side of his face. Move that nose line by opening up the right-hand side. It would also move the nose line further into the center of the picture. And now the big thing. This image needs contrast. I understand what you were going for. You were going for a particular effect. I'm not saying I dislike it. It needs contrast. If you just take this into Photoshop and hit auto on a levels dialog box, you'll probably be happy with the results. For example, the whites of the eyes. Every portrait, whenever you do a portrait, I'm going to assume that you had complete control of the lighting. And if you have complete control of the lighting, I need to see some whites in the eyes. I need a catch light in the eyes, something in there. And the camera right eye is almost pitch dark. The camera left eye, while I can see white, it's not enough to me. And again, that's just levels. That to me is the big thing, is the crop and the levels. I don't mind the expression, although maybe a little more life would be good. Deborah, what do you got?
Well, I thought long and hard about this picture. I have to commend the photographer for using himself as the subject. You know, that takes some guts. Somebody who's just really starting out doing a little bit of self-portraiture myself, you know, during this time that we've had in the last year. But there were some things I really loved about this portrait, and some things that could be improved. And I think, again, this is sort of, you know, exploratory for him. So I love the idea of this. I think the most interesting and expressive part is the gentleman's face, and I would love to see that rather than the shirt. So if the composition was such that it included more of the hat and a little bit more of the face, I think the expression is fine. A neutral expression, to me, is totally fine, but I'd love to see more of it. I think there's beautiful details in his face that can be brought out by working with this with a little bit more time and different composition. But I think that is an interesting aspect to do self-portraiture and work with the ideas and perhaps convert this to black and white. I don't even think the color is necessary. Again, it's the patterns, the details, the textures.
I like
that
the
all
idea.
Become very interesting.
That black and white idea is actually really neat. I like that idea. Don, before you go, really quick, a couple of comments here in the chat. First of all, Boris said, this man looks like somebody worth having a drink with. Totally agree. Ant said, I'd crop tighter on the right. Love the mood. In other words, what he's saying is go all the way or not, which I don't necessarily disagree with that. And then Scott said, I'd like to see a little more of the hat and less of the torso, which is exactly what Deborah was saying. So Dawn, what say you?
Well, I don't mind the crop on the left, right, and bottom, but I would think that, this is a very pensive mood that I'm feeling when I look at this particular image. And with that being said, it looks like the man is lost in thought. And as a self-portrait, that can sometimes be a difficult thing to capture. So definite kudos to that. But that almost needs to give the image some level of negative space. We have a little bit, a camera left of the head, but that thoughtfulness, that whatever it is you're thinking, however melancholy it might be, I almost want there to be like this to be a stronger vertical image, to have negative space above the head, space for thoughts in a strange sort of way. And yeah, a little bit more definition, of course, on the hat, but I don't mind the framing. Deborah made a great point about the sweater, the clothing that's being worn being somewhat brighter than the face. And you might be able to deal with some of that in post. I do like the design of that particular clothing. It just kind of fits. So I'm not going to say, go and shop for a new wardrobe necessarily. You might be able to solve something in post-processing. But otherwise, if the clothing was a little bit darker to suit the mood of the overall image, so that the brightest part of the image was the face, the connection to that element would be stronger as a result. And you'd have an even better shot. But I still like the shot as it is.
Yeah, and I should say, I love the shot. I think the creativity here on a self-portrait is fantastic. I do think more contrast would help, but that's a great point also on the sweater being brighter. You generally want your subject, the face, to be the brightest thing in any scene. So let's go to our next image. And this one, Deb, if you want to go first. This one is called White Hot Fever.
Yes, absolutely. It's beautiful. I mean, working with the idea of color infrared, so this is probably super color infrared, that allows a little bit more visible light to reach the camera sensor, so you have some tones to work with, as we've done here with the sky. I think it's beautiful. There are so many directions you can go. I mean, they even have a conversion that's 470. They call it hyper color. So, but it's really wild colors. But again, it doesn't really, suit the subject. So in this case, I think it's beautiful. I think it's got a beautiful path, a leading line. There's interesting textures in the foliage, and there's a mountaintop, and then you have the blue sky. For me personally, I'm a big fan of this the standard R72 conversion, which you can have a little blue sky, but I think that it really pulls your attention towards the sky, where the whole picture, I think the trees and the mountain are very important. So I like this. It's just personal choice. My choice would be for a black and white version, but that again is just very, very personal. But as far as technical, I would brighten up some of the areas in the foreground that they're a little bit on the dark side, and tone down some of the brightness, just so it's a little more balance of a composition. But as far as a blue sky infrared image, that's spot on.
There we go. Don, what do you got?
All right. And it's interesting to mention that this is in the comments, they say that it is a 590 nanometer infrared image. And it's important to know what 590 nanometer is. That's something around yellow. And so that means that you've got the infrared light that's coming into a frame like this, but you also have a very big chunk of the visible spectrum that is also being added into that. And what that does is it lets you play with colors. However, the colors, I think, are more muted than could be possible with that 590 nanometer filter. You can play with wild colors at that level if you really wanted to crank them up. And you don't see that here. I can get results like this with false color at 720 nanometer, which might be the more ideal scenario, because the more visible spectrum you add into an infrared scene, the lesser contrast, that really nice high contrast infrared feel you have. So you lose that when you start adding in the color. It's a compromise. And so if the color's not needed, go for the contrast. And if this is a camera that has been modified to be 590 nanometer, you can add on a Hoya R72 filter to the front of your lens and still get that effect. You can always go deeper into the infrared spectrum than you could otherwise. I love the path, the path leading into the frame. You don't quite get a vanishing point, and I'm not sure how many curves around this path you could have focused on where that vanishing point, the path kind of going to a convergence into the distance was a little bit more obvious. I might have just enjoyed this entire walk with the camera in the bag and then walked back until I found exactly the right moment where that came to be, where I could still see a mountain in the distance. And if you don't find it, then you've just had a great time going out for a walk and thinking about photography. And I've done a lot of that myself with an infrared camera in hand.
So everything they said, and I'm pretty much done. No. So first of all, before we do this, interesting comments here. So first of all, Terry says blurry. For me, it may be your stream. For me, this is super, super sharp. Like this is really nicely sharp. Oh, actually, it looks like it's been taken off there now. So, but Gary said, nice shot, but does seem like two different images merged together. Maybe a black and white or toned could be interesting. And Scott says, for me, I get distracted by the mountain. I'd almost like it more without it or possibly a black and white. And for me, a couple of things. First of all, I love the use of infrared and false color here, right? The sky color is tasteful, real, clean. The trees, the mountain, the snow, very unique with that tree that is dead center in the path being a different color from all the other trees. I actually really like that. For me, the one thing that I think would really immediately make this image pop more, you have right at the very top of the frame, right here, you have a couple of branches that are just kind of sticking down into the frame but aren't attached to anything. They're floating. The ones on the left, the two small ones on the left, I would crop below those. I just don't think that you need them for anything. The path, I would clean the path up. There's a couple of large white spots in the path. I would clean those up. And here's the biggest thing. And we talked about this on a previous show, and it was a similar image where it feels like somebody was walking by, turned, and went, oh, that's cool, click, and didn't take the time to think vantage point. And this feels like you're a 6 foot tall person that walked up to the path and took a shot from 6 foot in the air. And I would have liked you to change my vantage point as a viewer. Get lower, or for that matter, get higher, but lower is probably easier unless you brought a step stool with you. Changing the vantage point, I think, would make this a much stronger image really, really quickly. Anything else on this one, guys?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. Does it say what lens? Because I was thinking that it just a wide angle lens would change the dynamics of 14 to 24. You really have a different kind of a look here. So I'm not sure if that's. And then I love what you said about the using an articulating screen, low angle. Right. That I think that would add to the drama of the shot.
The EXIF data showed a 1/160th of a second at f7.1, but I didn't see ISO or lens. Do you?
If you go into the show the EXIF data, yeah, it's an E mount 28 to 200 millimeter lens.
Oh, okay.
So 28 is about as wide as you could get. So you can't really get that extreme perspective that a 14 millimeter lens would have afforded.
Sure, but you can tell the difference between a 14 and a 28. If someone is really interested in landscapes, I'd really love to see the wide angle lens. It makes such a big difference, especially with the sky.
Yeah, and let me add, wide angle, not fisheye. Although fisheye has its purposes, but more of a rectilinear wide angle, like in the Nikon world, what would that be, like a 14 to 24?
Yes, a 14 to 30, but 14 to 24 is the latest.
Okay, like in the Z series, right? Or in my world, it's the 16 to 35 Mark II on Canon. Would do absolute wonders with this. All right, let's jump to the next one, and then we'll take a break after this one. And this one, Don, if you want to go first, it's called Water Droplet Refraction 3.
Well, apparently 2 prior attempts to arrive to this image, and so this is a what looks to be a dandelion seed covered with water droplets and a Gerbera daisy in the background, a technique that I am very familiar with.
So let's just say really quick, now you know why I had Don go first.
So number one, the image is a little bit dark. And so I don't know exactly what camera mode that it was taken in, but if it was in aperture priority, then you might have the automatic exposure modes for this kind of work never really hit the mark perfectly. And so I always take a bit of control over that for these images, and you can always adjust that in post. But if I had this image, as I do with my similar shots in Photoshop, I change the canvas around the image to pure white. And then I adjust the brightness of the image to that pure white canvas, because that's when somebody would be viewing it online, or if you're printing it, then you've got a good frame of reference for what that total white point is going to be and how that impacts your photograph. Now, there's a bit of blur here, and that comes from the fact that this is shot with the Canon MPE 65mm macro lens in 2 ways. There's blur coming in. Number one, it's 0.4 seconds, so just about a half a second, and so you could have motion blur, but it's also shot at f16, and I never shoot that lens at f16 because brief physics lesson, every lens, their aperture is rated at infinity. So if you've got an f2.8 lens, it's only f2.8 at infinity. And this lens can only shoot at 1:1 macro. And by the time a lens gets there, you've already lost 2 stops. And for every magnification that you have increasing beyond that, you add 1 stop to the effective aperture. And that translates to a high magnification shot like this might be close to 5 times magnification. So you're adding, if this was shot at f16, and that's f22, 32, 45, 65, 64, like 96 or something. You're probably close to f96 in that regard. And you're going to have diffraction that is going to soften the image as a result. Another comment that nobody else can offer commentary on, so I might as well offer it up as well because I've worked with the subject. This dandelion seed had water on it for a long time. They start more wide open and fluffy. Once they get wet for a significant period of time, that saturation of water causes them to close up in a conical type of shape. And it's okay to be experimenting with the subject at that time to focus on your camera settings and your focus and your general composition. But when you are ready to take the final shot, swap that dandelion seed out for a fresh one. They're not expensive things. And then you'd have a much more dynamic, spread out subject with fresh water droplets all across the way.
Okay, so I took a class that Don did for Princeton Photo Workshops on water droplet refraction photography. And I said to him, Don, I'm not going to take your time. You've got paying students. I'm just auditing the class, and I'm not going to take the time to do the homework, which was Steve trying to say, not a chance in hell this is going to work for me. Don's response was, oh no, you're doing the homework. So I had to do water droplet refraction shots. A, I loved it. B, halfway through suicide was considered. C,
frustration is guaranteed.
Yes, this is so freaking difficult to do. So here's where I'm going to start on the critique on this shot. You got the drops to stick. Yay. Okay? Because a spray bottle, I was using everything, and it was just really, really tough. So I've tried this. Not easy. Obviously blurry. That's a combination of everything Don said, from the lens. This is a focus stack to me, if I were doing this. But your shutter speed, everything else. So I'm going to stay away from the stuff pretty much that Don described, because that's his area. I'm going to talk about your processing. Your processing on this is too heavy-handed to me. You've got some blotchy colors. Somebody made a comment in the chat that large color swath across the top looks like somebody's finger is at the top of the frame. You've got haloing around the bottom drops and branches. So what I would say is less is more when it comes to processing. In other words, Scott Kelby used to say, and I love this quote, whenever I critique photos of flowers, I always think about this. A flower is beautiful by nature. So if you're going to take a photo of a flower, it better be something pretty amazing because the thing started beautiful, right? Well, it's the same type of a thing here. This is a beautiful idea with the water droplet refractions and the stems that you've got and the water droplet sticking to them. Don't take away that beauty by over processing the image. Let it stand on its own. Deborah, what do you got?
Well, I had to commend the photographer for attempting something like this, because clearly, obviously, this is a challenging subject. This is something that requires a lot of patience, a lot of passion, and a lot of technique, and a bit of technology. As Don said, you really have to know your stuff to be able to do this and understand the relationship between the subject and how the camera works and the lighting. So this is a very intense process. So I think it's an amazing attempt. I think that the photographer put it out there and really wants to learn about how they can make it better, what areas can be improved. And that's what I always think about when I shoot, what I like, what I don't like, what can be improved. These are all things that sometimes over time you really begin to see clearly. Well, there's another Nikon ambassador, Joey Terrell. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he does. I know the name, yeah. Don, and it just phenomenal stuff. And I've listened to him and I've watched what he does, and it's just so amazing. So I commend the photographer for making the attempt for this. I love the idea, the concept of having these beautiful reflections and something so organic as a flower. But obviously, they're striving to learn, so that's a good thing.
Okay, so before we go on to the next image, couple of comments here. First of all, Aunt Pruitt had to leave. Aunt, the fact that you were here at all means a ton to me, and Don as well. So thank you so much for taking the time out. I'm sure he's got to go do a show right now. And I love this one. Gary Monroe opens door for Aunt, like that. So for the image, Scott Shaw said, frustration, life of a macro photographer. And I want to ask Don, is it really... being as how you literally do this for a living, I'm not sure frustration is the right word. It's patience. I mean, if you get frustrated, you may have chosen the wrong genre.
So patience is an unknown amount of effort and time for an unknown outcome. And that kind of defines macro photography until you've done it a couple of times and you've reveled in your mistakes, which you have to do. And at that point, once you get a success in a particular area, it's no longer an unknown amount of effort and time for an unknown outcome. You know what those variables are. And like when I'm photographing a snowflake, I know how hard it's going to be. I know how much time it's going to take, and I know I'm going to love the outcome. And at that point, patience transitions into perseverance. And that, I think, is an important transition that every macro photographer has to go through. It's not always going to be a patience thing. It will be for every new subject you explore. And so you always still have to have it, but you don't have to use it every time.
And Terry said, replying to Scott, that's why I consume alcohol, which is, always a good point. And Jane is here. Jane just got up. So Jane, welcome. As always, thank you so much for stopping in. Before we move on, let's talk to Deborah here a little bit. So first of all, I have to say, I'm a fan of Deborah Sandidge, Nikon Ambassador. And I, as you know, you and I have talked about this when you were on the show once before. I'm such a big fan of your work.
Thank you.
The way I think of what you do, you specialize in artistic travel photography. And I said earlier that makes you wish you were on vacation, that makes you wish you were there. When you describe because your photography is not normal landscape. I mean, you do long exposures and you do these rich sceneries. How do you describe what you photograph to people?
How do I describe? I think the most important thing is I want to convey a sense of being there in that moment. So I really want the viewer to feel like they might get their feet wet, if I'm showing a beach photo and the waves are right there. So having that sense of motion or feeling like you're there. So to me, that makes me feel like I'm successful as a photographer. So that's one of the things I like to do. I love to convey a sense of time passing. So I'm often reaching for that 15-stop neutral density filter. And I love what happens. There's something very peaceful about extending an exposure over to 4, 5, 6 minutes or more where the water is completely smoothed out and the clouds are softly blurred and the subject really stands out. So there's a similarity between that and infrared photography, because then there's that sense of being surreal. There's something a little bit different rather than just a shot. We all can make a snapshot. That's why we use cameras instead of iPhones. There's a little bit more creativity available to us. So Yeah, that would be the main thing. I really want someone to feel what it was like to be there at that moment. And I want that moment to be exciting or beautiful or surreal.
When I see your work, well, two things actually. When I see your work, I do feel like I'm standing there. It's not just that I wish I was there. I kind of feel like I'm standing where the camera was.
Good
and
job.
I wish I could visit it. Do you have anything going on coming up as the world stops ending that you want to tell people
Oh
about?
my goodness. Yes, it's been a crazy, wild ride the last year. So most things are virtual. So I'm involved in a lot of things, but they are virtual. And I think as time moves on, then we'll be able to get a little back. Some things are a little uncertain, like rental cars. I was traveling recently up to on my own up to Maine, and then you have to really arrange the trip around the rental car. So it's a little kind of weird, but those things will smooth out. But yeah, so most things are virtual right now, which is great. It's a wonderful way to reach people, on an easier schedule until things really smooth out a little bit.
Is there somewhere people can find the things that you're doing? Are they links on your websites to workshops and things like that?
Sure. So I keep on Instagram and on Twitter. There's a little, it's called Linktree. It's just like a link in the bio, and that bio link just lists everything. So maybe there's an article that I've written, or there's something that's happening, an upcoming event. So all those things are listed right there. So it's easy to find.
And Don, what about you, my friend? You've got Photo Geek Weekly that you do weekly. You just had a great episode with Chris from DP Review, Chris Nichols.
Yep.
Inside the Lens, the stuff you do with DP Review, shipping your book. What do people need to know about?
Well, I mean, for anybody that's watching this live, we will not be recording a live Photo Geek Weekly after this because there just hasn't been a whole lot of news. And Steve and I are both incredibly busy with other projects, but we're going to pick up a live episode early next week. But photogeekweekly.com. If you want to listen to that, the latest episode I think was fantastic. I'm biased, but I think it was. I do know that the last image that we were talking about with those water droplets, the photographer of that image has a copy of my new book. I recognize the name. And so I'd like to plug that for anybody interested. This tome of knowledge covers all of the things of water droplet photography, talking about diffraction and how you can play around with all of the different elements to make those images work, and a lot more than that, of course, in a 384-page book with just about 90,000 words in there. And you can get a copy of that at skycrystals.ca. So I'm eagerly shipping those out as quickly as I can. Any new orders, they go out in the order they're received. So if you want one, get the order in now, and I'll get it to you as quickly as I can.
And let me add, I have the book. If you look down the YouTube channel, you'll find I did an unboxing of the book, including trying to get 3D pictures to work, which obviously isn't going to work that way. We have a couple of people that are in the chat that also have the book. Andre has the book. Mike Martin, I think, got the book. He's in there as well. Scott Shaw says, let me pull it up, actually.
How's the book shipping going? You know what? I got about 600 or 700 more books to ship to be completely caught up. But I had over 3,000 orders to be fulfilled, all by me personally. So I'm nearing the end of that marathon. So it's the lights at the end of that tunnel.
Perfect. Okay, so if you've got the book, drop some notes in the chat so everybody can see it. But I love the book. It's absolutely wonderful. So let's jump back in. Image number 6. This one is called Woman in Black. And I will go ahead and take this one first. And so I wish Ant was still here, because Ant Pruitt is a great street photographer. And in fact, he was just on a recent episode of Photo Geek Weekly with Don too. But I was hoping Ant would be able to see this one. By the way, Arctic Penguin is here waiting patiently for his book. So
you'll get it soon.
This particular shot, called Woman in Black, couple of things. First of all, conceptually, I love what you did here. I love the way your mind works. The shape of the window is moving left to right with a straight line, rounded on the right. Having that kind of motion makes sense. So I love the angle that you're at. I love the frame within a frame. There's that little frame within the window. You've got the woman inside of that frame. Your vertical lines are vertical. Thank you very much for that. However, here's where I'm struggling actually a little bit with it. I wish the guy wasn't in there, because if it's woman in black, I'd like to see just the woman. I'd rather you had waited a little bit until he was out and then somebody was in there and title it differently if you need to. More importantly, the sun is hitting her beautifully. I love the way she's exposed, but it's her back and her hair. If you had waited until somebody had walked the other direction, I think that would have been and again, nobody else in there, but somebody in that bright area walking towards the left so I could see face, I think would make it a stronger image in that sense. The only person and walking towards me. Careful of your highlights. There are a couple of clip spots that are easily, and my guess is, recoverable here. And here's where I think this image becomes really cool. And my apologies if you don't want anybody messing with your image, but I did take this down and play with some crops. And if it were me, I don't need any of this up at the top right. Again, I missed it. Typical Steve. Any of that up at the top right. I would crop just below that, and I would do the same down there and crop just above that into the colored wall area. And when you do that, it makes for a very interesting shot to not get that perspective corner going, right? Because you got a straight line on the bottom, the window is going back, but then it's just kind of solid color wall, and it looks really, really cool. Deborah, you want to go next?
Yeah, I thought about this picture a lot, this photograph. There are a couple of thoughts I had with it. First of all, I was thinking it would be interesting as a black and white shot, just because the dynamics of the shot. I think some of the color just grabs the viewer's attention and pulls away from the action. I love the concept that the photographer wanted to create sort of an action shot. So it's just a little bit soft, the person's walking into the scene. If the person had taken a few more steps, then they would be in that dramatic light and there would be beautiful shadow there. And I think that would be interesting to work with. But there's also a shot within this shot that's actually framed up within the window. There's a line there that's an interesting shot, because there's a figure, something behind the woman that's sort of looking down as she's walking. But I do like the high contrast, the darks, the lights. You know, to me that is very interesting. But I think there's a couple different ways, as you mentioned, to be able to work with this as far as composition.
Okay, Don, what do you got?
I don't mind the guy in the background, Steve, if he was a more prominent part of the composition. You know, I like the fact that this is a frame within a frame within a frame within a frame, right? The woman within the rectangle, within the bullet-shaped thing, within the framing that has those diagonal lines on the outside, and then the frame of the photo itself. It feels like this sort of nested, those Matryoshka Russian stacking dolls. It kind of just, it has these layers, and I like that. But it feels like at least one of those.
Except that you can see his face. You can't see the subject's face.
But I think that if you were to crop in to get rid of that stacking effect, because one of those layers has nothing in it, just the wall, right? That's just barren, and it doesn't really function well as negative space for me. So if I were to crop in significantly and have it a juxtaposition of the man's face and the woman, one kind of looking at the other, and then you've got the ghosted image of the woman in the background that Deborah had mentioned. That's probably from an ad or something on the rear wall, because we see 7-Eleven and a bunch of other stuff there that's reflecting along the way. And if you have that as just a much smaller frame, cohesive around that, play with this as a subtractive art image. Cut it down to the smallest number of ingredients you could possibly have while the image still works, and cut it down further than that to see when you break it, and then step back a step, because that's the only way that you realize where you've gotten to the most minimalistic type of an image. And I think that would work with this particular shot.
So a couple of comments on this. First of all, Gary said, cool reflection shot. Love how she's highlighted. Would crop the left and the top. So leave the bottom. That's kind of interesting. By the way, Elizabeth said, has the book, helped with some proofreading. I've read it several times and have a lifetime to learn ahead of me. But Scott said, love the frame within a frame, but get distracted by the top right poster, which I forgot to mention. But yeah, no matter what you do crop-wise, I would probably burn that poster down. It is kind of bright. Casey said that they would Photoshop him out. I think you could have just waited a second. And by the way, you could always, it's street photography. You normally don't want to get involved. But if you really want to make the shot, you could always walk up to one of these people and say, excuse me, would you mind turning and walking the other way and make your shot? It depends how involved you want to get with it. So let's jump to the next image. And this one is called Another World. Deborah, you want to go on this one? And before you do, let me just say, this one's going to seem a little smaller in frame. And that's because this thing is so panoramic wide that the way I'm capturing the browser window, it would extend out past what I'm capturing. So, in fact, I'll show you here if I zoom in really quick. Watch. Like that. And it's cutting a lot of it off. So I'm just doing that so that you can at least see the whole image. Deborah, what do you got?
Oh, I think it's a beautiful sunset. I mean, I definitely would have grabbed the camera in this and had this opportunity. A couple of things that came to mind was it's very centered. So it just feels very isolated. And if you look at this, you can almost just sort of extend this off to the right side to capture maybe a little less foreground and more of the right side. I don't think the left side is necessary to this story. It's a beautiful shot. You've captured really beautiful, interesting light, but maybe just crop it a little bit higher, and sort of your second chance, the composition post is don't need that left side. But that's just that's just my personal opinion on that. But I think the exciting part of that image is the dramatic light.
Okay, so Dawn, before you go, I've written down on a piece of paper something I think you're going to bring up, and we'll see if I'm right. My guess is that I am. And by the way, who was it? Arctic Penguin says this looks like Svalbard.
Svalbard, yeah. I mean, in the far north above Norway, is it its own sovereign entity, or is it a part of Norway? I'm not sure, but it does look definitely far north. You've got no semblance of trees or anything but the lightest grasses, and that barren landscape with this structure in the middle, I think, is great. Now, there's a couple of things here. It definitely looks like there has been some post-processing done on the image, and I don't mean for that to be a bad thing, but if I can identify post-processing, then I probably shouldn't see it. And all of those metal posts coming up, right in the middle of them, they're brighter than the top and the bottom. And there's no lighting in the scene to account for that. And so that might indicate that there's an editing point in there. And I agree that you don't want them to be completely in shadow, but just kind of hide the edit a little bit better, make it a bit more subtle as things go along. I love the reflection in the windows, showing more of the sunset in the overall scene itself. And as Deborah said, there's less that's needed on the left-hand side of the image. There's one white spot amongst the rocks near the top of the horizon, closer to the left edge, and that's a distraction. I'd crop at least that out, and who knows exactly how much farther I would go. But Steve, you're probably talking about the watermark, so yeah. So we've brought this up on a number of image critiques in the past, that a watermark can be distracting. I love when a watermark, I don't say don't put it there, just make it subtle, make it something that is not obscuring the image, that doesn't draw my eye to it as a point of visual interest. Just something that if I need to follow up with a photographer, like if it's a signature and a very subtle website address or name, then I'd be able to gather that. But you've got a watermark that's trying to exist over a very busy part of the image, and there's a conflict there. So I would have either dodged down that area of the image so that there was less detail, using a gradient filter just to darken that area down so that the watermark didn't have a lot to compete with, and then make a more subtle watermark. Because if you have a watermark in a busy place, it's going to look bad. And then you're going to make the watermark more obvious, and then it's going to look even worse overall. So I think that's the battle that the photographer was having in this particular image with that watermark. And I, move it down a little bit, or ghost it into the lower right hand side where you don't have as much detail on that smoother rock, albeit that negates my thoughts of cropping it in and so on and so forth. But find a better way with the watermark to put your name on the image, but make sure that it's only seen if somebody wants to see it.
Okay, so I'll get to the watermark in a minute. First of all, love the fact that this is not only called Another World, but it looks otherworldly. It's a cool building, cool location. According to Andre, who would know, it's Fogo Island Inn in Newfoundland. So very, very interesting place. I love the building. Couple of things though. And by the way, nice sky color on the left, on the right, lots going on here that I love. There is some banding happening in the sky above the building. I'd fix that. There is some very light halo effect on the pillars that Don was talking about. Clearly either Photoshop world. I don't even know where I was going with that. Photoshop work or something was done there where you've got this kind of white cloud almost over those pillars that doesn't match the light sources at all of what you're looking at. There is a blue cast on the building. I'm thinking that building is probably more white. And there was a comment, Scott Shaw said, mood feels cold to me in a good way, like a pre-snow winter morning. Totally agree, but I want the building to be an accurate color. And I've never been there, so I could be completely wrong. But that building seems way too blue to me. So if all else fails, take an adjustment brush, take layers, something, and color correct that building's white balance or color temperature to make that more the color it actually is. It blends in with the sky unnaturally to me when you have also that warm light in the scene. Add temperature, subtract tint, whatever it is that you need to do. By the way, that to me will also make it stand out against that busy ground a lot more. So now let's talk watermarks. Couple of things. Everything Don said needs to be subtle. But you've got a couple other things going on here. You've got an effect on the text, and it's a serif text. Serif text against this rocky terrain is almost impossible to read. Use a sans serif text, maybe just make it white, but then make
Serifs
it maybe...
are the little things that go beyond the edges
Correct.
of the letters, like a T that really extends down on the edges of the tops and things like that.
Well, I'll give you an idea.
For those
here.
that aren't familiar with it, what a serif
you can look right here at the top of the I, has lines. It's not just a vertical line. Or the top of the M. Let me jump full screen so that you can see it. Those are serifs, the parts that stick out of the actual text. And don't go with a sans serif text, which is more the block style font. Make it white, make it 60% transparent so that I can see the rocks coming through, that it's subtle, but it doesn't affect the picture per se. And the other thing is you don't necessarily need it that big unless for some reason you can do it that big and keep it subtle, okay? This is branding. It involves legalities at a certain point. But when you're making it big like that, you're talking branding. Keep your branding clean. That may be your logo for all I know. And if that is your logo and you want to stay with your logo, then what I would have probably done is put it up where the sky is and make it transparent there so that it doesn't look like an afterthought kind of thing. Okay. Anything else on this image, guys?
I'm good.
Okay. So let's go to the next one. And Don, do you want to take Florence, Artist at Work?
Sure. Now this is an interesting depiction.
I love what? Before you do, Don?
Yeah.
There is one thing I forgot to mention on this one that I want to.
Uh-oh.
And that is the same thing, but I do want to reinforce that building is dead center, and somebody even did the comment, dead center is deadly. If you cropped probably half to 2/3 of that space on the left-hand side, I think that you would have, that's weird, my pen must have done. I think that you'd have a much stronger image. It would bring that building to the left third, maybe even extend it to the right on your framing. I just think your framing was off a little bit. All right, sorry about that, Don. Go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. I love the depiction of art happening, and the photography is an extrapolation, being just a storytelling of the creation of that art. And I, it's interesting to see the subject and the rendition of the looks like they're using pastels or something like that, where you can he's about to take his fingers and start rubbing things to smooth certain elements of that artwork out, and you've got the previous attempts of that on his hands already, you know, like he's been doing this all day type of thing, and you've got the motion blur, a little bit of motion blur in the hand. And so I like that, you know, that to me feels like this guy is so focused on it. He's got one charcoal pen or pastel in his hand and another one in his teeth, and like he is just focused on making this work. And the fact that you can see the art and the subject in the frame, I think, is wonderful. At first, I was going to say, okay, well, I don't. Do I like or dislike the fact that there's no vertical lines? You know, the paper is on an angle, but the bricks in behind are also on an angle almost to the same degree, you know, and they kind of converge and equal each other out. I wish the woman in the frame was making the exact same expression as she is in the portrait of her. Her expression has changed. You know, obviously she was told to kind of look to the side, and then now she's not keeping that same pose during this composition, and that kind of breaks it apart a little bit for me. But as a casual observer, as a street photographer, you have no control over that aside from choosing the exact moment for which to take the image. And that decisive moment could have been 2 seconds prior to this. It could have been 2 seconds after this, when the artist was now in control of the subject's composure and saying, no, take that same pose again, please, and just kind of echo that across. You know, it is a bit strange that maybe I would have waited for her to have a second ear in the portrait because she only has the one. And it's a bit distracting for me because she's got 2 ears in reality. And but that's about all I can say on this one. I do like the image, and it's a wonderful moment in time that's captured.
Okay. So everything Don said, I completely agree with. And an interesting thing that you brought up is the tilt. So the lines behind her lean down to the right. The poster itself, or the drawing itself, leans to the left. And I don't think you could straighten either one of those. I'm actually okay with where that is. It's a very creative idea. I've done something like this before on a set for Mav TV once. It was a musician that was playing. And as they were interviewing her on camera, there was an on-camera video monitor. And I did the same type of a thing where I focused on her image on the video monitor, blurring the real person in the background. The key there is you need to see both, right? To get the effect, I need to see the sharp picture of her in the drawing on the monitor or whatever, and the actual physical subject in the background blurred slightly softer. And that's one of the issues I have here, is I don't think she's soft enough. I'd like her a little softer and disappearing into the background where I know it's her. But here, she's competing with the drawing, and I think the drawing is the subject here. But again, great idea. The hand blur, as Don said, a lot of people would miss that there's 2 pencils here. And then he's also smudging a shadow. I think that's a cool part of it. I don't like, you're not going to get him to move the clip, but I don't like the clip hitting her in the head. If you had moved a little bit to the right, that would free that from her head, but then it would put his head over her neck. What I think would be cool is if you could have gotten it to where she was on both sides of him. So the drawing was to his left and she was to his right, rather than a vertical plane. It was more of a horizontal plane, I think would have been neat. The biggest change to me would be breathing room. I think it's too tight to his head. I think it's too tight to the pencil on the left. I think she's too bright. Like, her hair is almost the brightest spot in the image, meaning the real her. So I would probably bring that down a little bit so it wasn't so bright. I think that's about all I got. Deborah, what about you?
I had similar thoughts. Again, it is what it is. It's street art. You're catching a moment. It's hard to wish a lot of the things into a composition. A lot of it is just, take the picture and work with the idea. Different lenses, obviously, as you said, would make a difference if you're working with perhaps like a 50 millimeter lens and having something. I think it'd be fun to see like the actual picture really, really in focus, and then have her, like, again, out of focus. I think that would be an interesting dynamic. But having the artist, I mean, that's essential to this. You know, he's smoothing his work on the paper and creating. So it's an interesting shot. But again, it is more of street photography kind of thing. So it just sort of happens as it happens. But I like the shot. You know, I think it's an interesting moment in time.
Okay, and a couple of interesting comments on this one. First of all, by the way, Andre, if you're still here, he said he had to go. Thank you for stopping by. Gary said, cool shot, wonder if it's a little too close. And that's the thing. I don't know if you had a fixed focal length lens. Again, it's street photography. As Deborah said, you can't necessarily wish things into a picture, but being aware of those things. It's one thing if you're aware of them and you can't, right? You can't move to the right because you'll fall off a cliff. But being aware that if you could, you need to, is a completely different thing. And that's kind of where we're going here is just giving you things to think about. Gary said, cool. I'm sorry, I already did that one. Gary said, cool shot. Wonder if it's too close. Scott said the clip on the artboard goes into her head, but loves it as a journalistic shot. And that's one of those key balances that you got to do. And then Tim says, being picky, I'd like a tad more separation on the right side of her head between the canvas, same thing that we're all talking about. And Scott asked, what is the f-stop on this? And the f-stop on this, I don't have. I don't think there was any EXIF data on this shot, was there?
No.
Don? Yeah, so we got nothing on that one. Sorry about that, Scott. Okay, anything else on this one before we go to our last shot?
We're good.
Okay, and this one is for Deborah to go first, and it's called Bridge of Flowers.
Bridge of Flowers, yes. Oh, one of the things I liked about this, I love a picture in a picture, and that's what reflections do. You have a really nice sky with contrast, white clouds, blue sky, reflecting in this water, so that's what makes it more of a mood shot. It's very peaceful and tranquil. Yeah, I like the idea of this. There's I'd say technically it looks pretty good. I mean, I don't know what the vantage point would be for, you know, moving to the right or left, but there is a nice diagonal line that moves through this photograph from left to right. And I always try to think about those angles where you have a path going through the photograph. So it was beneficial as far as this composition goes. I think it's really cool that there's a red barn or house back in the background. I might wait till that person gets out of the shot. I really, you know, you can actually shoot this way if you're so inclined to shoot a series of photographs and then use scripts and Photoshop and kind of blend them away. So sometimes you can do this if again you're so inclined, but or just wait till that person passes. But I like the idea of it. It's a peaceful mood shot. Again, reflections are always beautiful to incorporate into a photograph.
Okay, Don, what do you got?
Yeah, the person, that's an interesting element in the frame. I don't think it's done right in this image, but it could have been. You know, you could remove the person, as Deborah said, but it looks like the man is looking down and his arms are kind of to his side, like he might be pushing a baby carriage or, you know, something like that. And if that's the case, then that's a moment. You know, having a father and a baby walking along this bridge of flowers could be a narrative, and that could be an element that you might want to accentuate, but we're only seeing half of that story. And I might be reading it wrong, or you might want to wait until somebody comes across that way, or maybe you are photographing with somebody next to you that you could say, okay, well, I often go out with my wife taking pictures in scenic places like this. It's not as much fun to travel alone. And I might ask her, you know, go stand on that bridge and go look off into the distance and be the subject in the frame for me to be a part of that. Not saying that you need that, but you do have that break in a very important part in the frame where that element could be there. The red barn in the background I like, but it's not in the right place. Like it's so off to the side of the frame that my eyes are being drawn to it and the red roses, I'm guessing, that are right in front of it, rather than following along the line to the opposite shoreline, which is kind of what the image is trying to accomplish here, especially with the reflections and everything guiding my eyes in that direction. And when I get down there, there's no visual anchor point. I mean, there's an American flag in the sky, I suppose. There's that, you know, framed around some trees, but I don't see any one thing along the end of that path that really grabs my attention. If there was a small fishing boat going by, I'm not sure how active that waterway is for any boats or canoes, kayaks, etc. But something like that in the water might give me that visual anchor point within the frame. I can't see what much else would provide that in that distance, because I can see a car in the background that's very, very small, and anything that far away is not going to be poignant enough within the frame to grab my attention. But you got to have something at the end of the line to just gravitate towards, and then let your eyes wander around the frame. One other thing, the tree in the foreground that's overhanging on the top, I don't necessarily mind it on the left. As Steve had said before, the ones that are somewhat orphaned from the tree itself up on the top, edit those out or somehow frame the shot in a way that they wouldn't be in there. But the ones on the left, they are darker to the top and they get lighter as the frame goes down, which is indicative of using a graduated neutral density filter in Lightroom or Camera Raw, where you're trying to darken down the sky, but you're also darkening down the foreground element. You'd have to counter that with an increase in the shadows in those areas so that it doesn't look like things are getting muddy there. I don't know if I left you anything, Steve, but go for it.
No, I'm dead now. Okay, so beautiful scene, beautiful color, very tasteful treatment that you did. What Don said about the orphan branch on the far right, clone that out. There's even a little one closer to the main part of the tree. I'd crop just below that or clone that out. Either way that you need it to get it where you want. The vertical lines in the buildings are not vertical, so they're close, but I would probably fix that. It's called Bridge of Flowers, but I don't really see a lot of flowers. I kind of wish that I could see more flowers. Just the name means something. I'm not saying that it's not beautiful. I'm saying the name didn't kind of misled me a little bit here, and I don't like the random guy. He may be pruning. He may be working on this Bridge of Flowers. Yeah, I would have asked him, do you mind just standing at the rail for a second and looking off into the distance and make it a guy in deep thought, right? Just stage it with somebody right there. Or
especially like if he has some big shears in his hand and he's just hanging them over the edge, wandering in his thoughts as if he has to get back to work, making these flowers look beautiful in a second.
And in fact, if you could get him a bungee cord and he could jump, but again, work the shot, make something happen. Even if there was like a boat or something like that in there, I think would be good. And there's a couple of interesting conversations happening here in the chat as we finish up. First of all, Terrell made a comment about the last one that we did, that I think journalistic pics get a short shrift. I agree with him. I think that they can get a short shrift. And who was it? Tim Davis made the comment, it's a fine line between a really good journalistic shot and a great one, to which I said I suggest it's not as fine as people think. And the comment that I got back was, let me just find it here. Fair, but little things matter. And so I've got a show coming up. It's going to be in August probably, with a 4-time Pulitzer Prize winning photographer. He's the tour photographer for the rock band The Who, a guy by the name of William Snyder. And he shot the album cover. He shot it as a journalistic image. And he shot an album cover that was used for Stevie Ray Vaughan's The Sky is Crying. And we're going to break down that shot on the show. And one of the things I said to William during the show was I don't like the term photojournalism because I think it diminishes what photos do. The photo in and of itself can be journalism. You can tell an entire story with a photo. It's just journalism to me. But again, little things do definitely matter. Gary said on this particular shot, like the lush greens and reflections, but may point the camera down a few degrees and wait until the guy moves. Okay, we kind of discussed that one. Casey said, feels like it needs more flowers, less green on the hill, crop something. The hill is a little bit distracting. And Terrell made the comment, going back to the photojournalism, totally agree. I would say that those journo shots that are in places or incorporate instances that we would not normally encounter in life are the ones, it's not showing on screen, hold on. We elevate as a great picture, which totally agree with. So anything else you guys want to talk about? I had a 10th shot, but we're already in an hour and a half. I can do it if you want to. It's up to you guys.
I mean, I guess you leave
time?
that to the audience to
okay,
decide,
so to the audience, I've got one more shot. Do you want it, or are you timed out at this point?
I know a few people have gone, but I do want to say one thing about the shots that we've been looking at here. In general, I believe, and I mentioned it earlier, a sense of minimalism can go a long way in some images, because you've got a core message that can get lost in the fluff of the surrounding. And that's not to say that you need to do this approach for every photograph, but it is something to keep in mind when you are doing landscape, situational, street photography, that there will be elements in the frame that you do not need. And you might have the power, not saying that you do, but you might have the power to remove them. Explore that power as best you can.
Yeah, I agree. So it overwhelmingly, Terrell says yes, yes. Terrell, thank you so much, by the way, for being here. Terrell is a wonderful photographer in his own right. Jane, Malcolm, everybody here, just wonderful. All right, so let's do this 10th one. We'll just do a quick version on this 10th one. And Deborah, you might as well close us out.
Oh, okay. So.
Oh, and by the way, this one is called Dancing in the Moonlight.
Dancing, yes, it's very aptly named. So yeah, this is a really cool shot, obviously composited, or I would imagine, but it's a beautiful shot. I think that there's a graceful way with the pose. What I do like is this translucency of the fabric. So I like that. It just adds an ethereal look to the photograph. I personally like the profiles of like more of a silhouette. You can see exactly her profile in the shot, but there's still some translucency with the fabric. Not being a portrait photographer, there's a lot of different poses that one could experiment with this. So there's a very graceful way to portray the image. But I mean, it's more of a for fun type of thing. We've got the moon, obviously in a studio type of a setting. So it's a creative shot. So digital art is, you can have a lot of liberty and a lot of fun with that. So I think that is a very expressive way to work. Everything doesn't, reality doesn't always have to be so real. It's just more fun to have something a little bit more lighthearted and fun. So I think that's what the photographer was going for here, something a bit more expressive and more digital art.
Okay. And Tim Davis said that he's got to go. Tim, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. So I'll go next here. A couple of things. First of all, you took a chance here, right? You tried something different. And I love that. I love it when any creative, photographer or otherwise, thinks outside the box and thinks, how can I put things together in a way that I would not normally see? The moon, however, here isn't a great moonshot. It's completely clipped. To me, and by the way, and it's over sharpened. If you're going to put a moon behind a beautiful model, the moon has to be the best moon you've ever seen, right? I mean, it's got to be exposed properly with detail without being over sharpened, all of that type stuff. Once you get the moon in there, the way you've centered the moon now, if you want the model in front of the moon, your model is now dead center. So I would have tried to offset them in a way that gave a little bit more room so everything wasn't dead center. Dead center is deadly, is the old saying. And to me, this feels overly posed because of the dense centerness. And posing is hard, but she looks unnatural. And I would argue she almost looks uncomfortable with her toe up like that. She's got on her right hand, I don't know why her little finger is sticking out like this. Those little details matter. I remember talking to Renee Robin once, and she did something in a shot where the hands were out a certain way. And I'm like, did she just do that? She goes, oh no, I walked over there and I told her exactly what I wanted her fingers to be doing. That's where the details matter. In photojournalism, like we were talking before, you're going to capture what happens in front of you and you can't be involved. But in a studio shot, you should be 100% involved with everything that ends up, quote, on the film, right? So I would fix that. The upper part of her body, as Deborah said, I love that it's coming through the dress. I love the silhouette and side view of the face. the bottom half of the body doesn't match. It's not just that the light falls off. It's that it's too dark, especially when you get down to her right heel. Get a reflector in there, or a very small little bit of fill light to even the light out on her. That's all I got. Don?
So I agree with that. There needs to be a hair light on the back of her hair, because you can see like they're imitating the fact that the moon is the light source. And to that end, I actually don't mind that it's slightly overexposed, because if it's the light source, it's going to be that bright. It's not going to be a good shot of the moon. It is lighting her, and thereby it has to be a brighter part of the image. But that's not coming through along her hair. It's coming through along her wrist, her arm, and her clothing, and the translucency of that. And that's great, but it doesn't cover the back of her head. And so you would expect it to, if that's what you're trying to figure out here. And so, and I agree with your idea with staging and posing, but I look at the bottom, the floor that she's on looks kind of like rocky and cratery, like it's maybe even a printed map of the moon surface or something. I don't know if they went to that level of detail, but
so glad you mentioned that, because I thought it was me. But doesn't that look like there's craters down there?
It kind of looks like that, but then that's somebody, maybe they're standing on the moon as a giant. But I'm reminded of those famous astronaut photos from NASA with the footprints in the dust, the moon dust. And I would want, like, if I were to try this shot, and I would probably fail, but I would take a bag of flour, and I'd find a way to just completely flatten it out, shake it across some giant pieces of cardboard or something to make it all flat, and have the model walk out on the flower, which would be a surrogate for moon dust. And you would see her footprints leading into the scene that echo that classic NASA footprint on the moon mentality, to echo the fact that she is there, in a sense. I mean, it's a juxtaposition. Obviously, the moon's behind her, but if they're trying to echo that whole idea and that motif, that might be a direction I would take it. And you're muted, Steve. Sorry.
Sorry about that. I do that just so room noise doesn't come in, and then I forgot to unmute it. Couple of good comments on this one. And Scott Shaw brought up this one. The bright spot behind the left knee, camera right, her left, needs to be fixed. And you can definitely see the bright spots behind the knee, and I agree that should be evened out a little bit. But also you've got Terrell, who says, I appreciate any shooter who plans a shoot. I commend this photographer for planning something out and executing that vision. Can't stress that enough. And I started.
Go for it.
You came up with something. You came up with something different. How can I put things together? What can I do that is unique? And you executed it. So again, I just want to stress our comments here. First of all, you can ignore them if you want to, obviously. Our comments here are designed to help you see what could even be a great shot and take it to the next level, because we all have those things that we miss in a shot periodically. Scott says, amazing how Don's mind works. Yes. Oh, yes, it is. But this is an interesting one. I don't know if this would work. Gary said, I like the shot. Wonder if a close-up of just her torso would work. Also mentions the hand posing. But do you think just the torso would work here? It might if you cropped like just above the hip.
I think it'd be more expressive. I don't think we need the legs in this to communicate the idea that the photographer had in mind. I think it's a cool idea.
Unless she was dancing, I mean, unless the pose was different in some way, the feet aren't necessary. Again, in this construct, if I had like nice, cool moon footprints, then I'd want them. But yeah, no, that's a great different interpretation.
Yeah, I agree. And Terrell's will be the last comment. Said after Don's comment, that's why a team is awesome, that you can collaborate with. It can take your idea even further. And that's the idea, right? Take our ideas, ignore. I've said this before, but in image competitions, I've stood in the back of the room listening to my image be critiqued and thought to myself, you people don't understand what I shoot. You're wrong. And the truth is, they may not understand what I shoot, but inevitably I always end up going, wait, you saw that in my image? I never imagined you would, and that's the goal, is just to open you up to different viewpoints of stuff. So, Deborah, if people want to find you, where can people go to find you?
They can find me at debsandidge.com, deborahsandidge.com, Twitter, it's all just Deb Sandidge. You can find me, just Google my name pretty much. and certainly I'm happy to reach out if you have any questions. And thanks for taking everything with a grain of salt. I mean, this is just personal, helpful, constructive, or creative information on the photographs. So obviously, they all have different meanings and different contexts, being street photography. So I was happy to share my opinion, and thank you for having me.
Oh, love having you. And again, love your work. Don, where can people find you, my friend?
Well, the podcast is photogeekweekly.com. My work, my portfolio, and social media links are found at doncom.ca. That's DONKOM.ca. And of course, my new book. I mean, you'll find a link there as well, but this you'll find at skycrystals.ca, where you can pick up a copy, either physical copy or ebook. Ebook, of course, you get immediately in your inbox, and I encourage everybody that hasn't taken a look at it to take a look at it. And if they have, drop me a line. Let me know what you think. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that people may have about it. And that's all from me.
Okay. And real quick before we leave, Mike Martin, thank you so much for being here again. Mike works for Casio and is a very, very smart photographer. And then we've got Gary, always turns on the applause sign again. I love having Gary here. Scott Shaw, thank you very much. Terry, Deborah, thank you for your input. Stephen, Don, another good show. Terrell commented, cry and learn after a critique. By the way, Deb is awesome. Totally agree.
Thank you.
Scott Shaw, thanks for all those people with the images that we're showing, which I got to remember to say. Those of you guys that submit to the Flickr group and participate in this, it's all because of you. So we just have opinions. We'll travel. So thank you very much. Matthew Wells, hey, Don, safety first. The book is a two-hand lift. Yes, that you need a... That book is so heavy. Mine's sitting right next to me over here.
It's nearly 4.5 pounds.
Don, as always, thank you. Yeah. And Deborah, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
And to everybody, this was number 21. We're doing these at the beginning of each month, usually on a Thursday, usually 1 p.m. Pacific time. Please share them with your friends. You can find out all the information on the normal shows at behindtheshot.tv. You can find me at stevebrazill.com. If you're interested in following anything social media-wise, you can do that as well. It's Behind the Shot TV or at Behind the Shot TV or at Steve Brazill on Instagram and or Twitter. Again, you're watching this on YouTube. If you would take a moment and just head down, click the subscribe button, click the thumbs up, all of that type of stuff. It is very, very much appreciated. And last reminder, the Wanderers Photo Workshop, please head to wanderersphoto.com. Check out the thing that I'm doing with Freddie Clark and Ant Pruitt and Andrew Scrivani coming up October 10 to 14 in New Orleans, an all-inclusive workshop. Again, I always feel like I have to say a couple of exceptions. Check the notes on the page. But it's going to be a really, really fun workshop. Mike Martin is saying again, Deb is awesome. I love it. To everybody, thank you so much for joining us. This is Behind the Shot Critique Show, number 21, and we will see you on the next show.